I'm a moving man with a necessary urge. Daylight's free, so's the freedom surge. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. I'll take you with me if your engine runs, but don't bother me, baby, if you can't come. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. Plane or bus, train or car, wherever it is, it's not too far. Move over, grab a hold and come along, baby. Move over, grab a hold and come along. Come on, baby, take my hand. Those who are scared out of the also ran. Move over,
okay, well,
come along,
Claire,
baby.
you're my granddaughter, and it's just an honor to get to talk to you today and tell you about our permanent funds. But I'm so happy that this is Thanksgiving week, and we can, in New Mexico, can be very, very thankful for everything we have. Did you know, Claire, that New Mexico is one of the richest states there is in mineral wealth? We're just right up there at the top on just about everything. You take certainly oil and gas, coal, uranium, molybdenum, potash, copper. We're just right up there at the top of any state in the Union. Now, certainly Alaska and Texas have more permanent funds, but that's what I want to talk to you about, because it's important that you, as a citizen of New Mexico, understand what we have and how lucky we are. Very few people understand where these permanent funds came from and why are they permanent. I'll tell you, why do we call them permanent funds? I'll tell you why. You know, when you pump a barrel of oil out of the ground, you can't pump it and sell it again, can you? It's gone. When you harvest a ton of coal, it's gone. You can only do it once. So the permanent funds are simply a set-aside of a little bit of that income that came to the state or the institutions of the state for the support of those institutions. And very few people understand this. They think of state land, which really isn't state land. It belongs to one of the 20 different state institutions. And I mean, it belongs to them. It's theirs. New Mexico State, for example, they have lots of land, but it's theirs. Say that section out there belongs to New Mexico State, it's theirs. Now, the two permanent funds I'm going to talk to you about today are the land grant permanent funds. We're going to cover that first, and then we're going to go to severance tax permanent funds, because it's a completely different kind of a ball game. Not many people realize that Ohio, for example, was the first public land state we had. And that was when Congress set aside Section 16 in every township in the state of Ohio for the support of the public schools in that state. And they did the same thing down through the admittance of all the states in the Union. They set aside certain lands for the support mainly of common schools. We call them common schools, it's public schools. But anyway, an example of the importance of this, like last year, the income from the common school account in the by the State Investment Council amounted to $541 million. Now that's a pretty good sum that went directly to our public schools. In other words, if we hadn't had that permanent fund there, you'd have had to pay, the citizens of New Mexico would have had to pay $541 million to have the same kind of support for our public schools. Okay, where did this land come from, and how did we get it? Well, in 1898, we had our territorial representative to Congress. His name was Ferguson, and he got an act passed that applied to New Mexico and Arizona that we would receive Section 16 and 36 for the support of public schools. And unless that land was already taken by a Spanish land grant or Indian reservation or whatever, if it's already taken, then the commission could designate in lieu sections. So we got that much land. But that first act constituted just nearly 7 million acres. And it went to the responsibility of the territorial governor, the surveyor general, and the who else was it? The land commissioner that was appointed at that time. Okay, it was their responsibility to decide which institution got what. And they came up with these 20 institutions in the state. And some of you just wouldn't believe, like Miners Hospital. They got some land. And when before New Mexico became a state even, why miners were very important here in this state. In fact, it's a sad thing, but we had the worst mine disaster in the nation in Dawson, where we lost 200 miners in one tragic accident. The biggest tragedy in the nation. But anyway, these lands were designated and apportioned by the territorial legislature. How many, like the common schools, public schools, got 85% of all the lands that were donated out of this 7 million acres. And then went right on down the line. Some institutions got very little, but they didn't need much, like the penal institutions, the school for the blind, school for the deaf, and so forth. But the permanent fund idea comes from the fact that, like I was telling you can only deplete these resources that we're blessed with one time. You can't do it again. So you need to set aside some of the royalties and sales. Now, the lease money to any of these institutions is for their operational budget. It goes right directly to them. And it's a regular thing that comes in and goes right straight to them. Now, then in 1910, why, we finally, New Mexico had been trying to become a state, and so had Arizona, since 1852, when the federal government bought this land right here where we are from Texas. The idea of the permanent fund is you set aside the royalties and the sales of that value so that the future generations can have some benefit. And like I say, the $541 million last year from the permanent fund was from money that was set aside from a depletion of oil, mainly oil and gas. And thank God we've got it. That land grant permanent fund now amounts to about $17.5 billion. And I'll tell you how that's set aside. Then the Severance Tax Permanent Funds, which we'll talk about later, is right at $5 billion too. So we've got $23 billion in permanent funds. Thank God we've got them. Okay, now then in this act, when we became a state, it was called the Enabling Act. It enabled us to become a state. If we agreed to certain things, we would get these lands. Okay, here's what we agreed to. That we would never sell these lands. All the other states had. They sold most of them. They pooped it away. And Congress saw that these things were not being managed very well. That all the other states, Illinois, for example, I remember they sold all of their state land to pay off their Civil War debt. But Congress told us that we're going to give you these lands, and you're going to select them. And but you've got to do what we say about this, and that is you cannot sell them without putting all of that money into the account of whoever's land use, whatever institution's land you sold. You got to put it all in. And the royalties from any minerals that are produced, that has to go into their account. A lot of people think, well, there's $14 billion that the State Investment Council is sitting on. It's just a big pot of money. No, it's not. It is a big pot of money, yes, but each institution of these 20 institutions has their own account. And it's all kept separately by the Investment Council, accounts of it. The Land Commissioner receives it, collects it, and turns it over to the State Investment Council and tells them whichever account it's supposed to go to, whoever's land it came from. And it's a very tight trust agreement. Another thing it says in our Enabling Act that enabled us to become a state, it says that if you ever do anything wrong, like pocket the money on a sale of land and spend it on operational funds for somebody that wasn't deserving of it. I'll give you an example. I remember in the early 70s why Colfax General Hospital was going broke. They couldn't pay their bills. And right there in Raton is the Miners Hospital that is one of these state trust accounts. They have their own land. And they had a lot of money because there's not any big demand for Miners Hospital anymore. There used to be, when we were becoming a state and so forth, we had coal mines all over and everything, but they had lots of money in their account. So, in the legislature's wisdom, quote, we decided we'd take $2 million from the Miners Hospital and give it to Colfax General Hospital, and they could keep their doors open. They're right there in the same town, just kind of across the roads from each other. Miners Hospital didn't like that. They said, no, that's not what the Enabling Act says. That's our money. And they took us to court. And they won, and we had to pay that $2 million back plus interest. And so we learned that, yes, this trust agreement we have with the federal government is very strong and very tight, and we better honor it, because no way we could ever afford to pay all the money back that we've received from these lands and minerals. In 1970, you couldn't believe, it was hard for any of us to believe the money that was coming into the state off of these minerals. It was, remember the uranium boom? We had the molybdenum boom up in Colfax County. And the money was just coming in. We couldn't believe it. And Walter Martinez, who was the Speaker of the House, he came to the Appropriations Committee and he said, look, we don't want to just spend this money because we got it. Let's set a little bit of it aside. And he said, just call it the Severance Tax Permanent Fund. So the Appropriations Committee said, yes, okay, that's a good idea, because once you get a government program started, there's nothing closer to perpetual life than a government program. So we didn't want to start anything we didn't really need. We put $18 million is what we set aside in 1970. Now remember that. Then the next session, why Red Pennington, representative from Bloomfield, and Bob Grant from Albuquerque, and I got together and said, look, this is a misnomer to call it the Severance Tax Permanent Fund. It's no more permanent than anything, because the legislature can spend all that money anytime they want to. I said, let's try and lock it up some way. Let's put half of our severance taxes each year into the permanent fund, and the legislature can bond or whatever they want to do with the other half. Fine. Now I'm talking about severance taxes are anything that's severed from the land except agricultural products, except timber is included in severance taxes. They pay, anytime you harvest a tree, you can pay a severance tax on it because it's severed. Then it amounts to around 350 to anywhere from 350 to $500 million a year, which is a pretty good sum. Still does. And so we went to the legislature and introduced this resolution. And I'll never forget the morning it was supposed to be on final passage, and we were doing some other business and so forth. And the Speaker, Martinez, called me up to the rostrum and he said, "Look, John, we're not going to pass your resolution as is unless you give the legislature some kind of an out in case of a really serious state emergency, that they can spend some of this money." I said, "Well, Walter, what do you recommend?" He said, "I'll tell you what we'll accept. If you would allow us to spend some of this money by requiring a 3/4 vote of all the members of each house, then we'll go along with you." Now I said, "Well, Walter, you know, when the Speaker tells you it's not going to pass like it is, you better listen." And I said, "Okay, Walter, we'll accept that." And we did. We sent it to the people, and they voted on it in the next election, and it passed by a big majority. The next session, why my good friend Bob Grant had dropped out of the legislature, and he was replaced by a fellow by the name of Ted Asbury. Great, big, good guy, and a conservative Democrat, that's what he was. He came to me and he said, "John, why in the world did you put that 3/4 vote allowing them to spend this money?" I said, "Ted, that's the only way I could get it passed. I had to." He said, "Well, it's wrong, and we ought to take that out. And I'm willing to help you if you want to take it out." And I said, "You damn right we want to take that out." And so we did. We submitted it back to the people the next election, and they passed that by a big majority. An even bigger majority, the way I remember. So, anyway, remember we were starting out with $18 million. And then we were putting half of all the severance taxes, half around $350 to $500 million every year into it. And I was asked to give a talk on this, I think it was in the year 2000. And that's 30 years later. And so I called the Legislative Council to find out how much money's in there. And I nearly fell over. It was over $4 billion. We'd gone in 30 years from 18 million to 4 billion. That's quite a growth. In fact, we figured up our growth rate has been just under 13% a year. But in that year, I think Governor Johnson was governor. He the Zuni tribe came to the legislature and said we cannot, we just don't have the same kind of resources and facilities that all the other public school kids have, and we need more capital outlay to build some more buildings. Well, they took us to court, took the legislature to court, and they won. And Governor Johnson agreed to, instead of putting 50% of the severance taxes in, we just put 45%. We cut it down. Then Bill Richardson came in, and during his 8 years, he cut that 45% down to nothing. The last year he was governor, he put $30 into the Severance Tax Permanent Fund. Now, things can't grow or anything else when you're just spending it out of it, not putting anything in. That doesn't work. So it has since been corrected, and they're building it back up. And like I was telling you, the stock market's had a lot to do with its growth the last year or two. But It's back up to nearly $5 billion. Another little side issue here that I think is very important for people to understand. It was in the late 70s why former Representative Grant came to me and he said, John, you know, we have really created a money machine. It's a money-making machine is what it is. And it was. Just look at that growth. He said, what I think we ought to do is just take all of the severance taxes collected each year and put them directly into the Severance Tax Permanent Fund. And then we can let the legislature bond off the income. Well, it sounds like a good idea to me. But we'll give them a transition period also where the legislature can bond directly out of the severance taxes, directly out of the permanent fund, Severance Tax Permanent Fund, and directly off the income. And we'll make a transition of 3 or 4 years. I think it's 4 years, where we shift all of our bonding to the income off the severance taxes. Okay, we got that passed. Well, I said, no, I'm not going to introduce this until I go talk to the governor. That was Governor King. I went up and talked to him, and he said, well, I'll let you know. I said, I'll let my people look this over and see what they think. And he called me back in about 2 weeks, and he said, John, you've got the best idea I've ever seen here. He said, if we do this, my people tell me we could eliminate all our state income taxes. We could eliminate part of our gross receipts taxes. We could just, we have a real money machine here if we just maintain it. And so he said, you go introduce it, and I'll do my best to help you get it passed. And we did. It passed. That summer, well, that's when I went out of the legislature, or I was going out. My term wasn't up till the last of the year, but Bruce King was going out too. He called me up that summer and he said, John, the IRS thinks we're doing an arbitrage on them. In other words, tax-free on both ends. And they don't like it. And he said, I don't think they really understand what we're doing. And what had happened is that's when Louisiana discovered all of their offshore oil. And they decided they wanted a permanent fund. But they sold bonds to build it. Now, that's something, and then all, of course, the income off of it was tax-free too, because it's from the state. Well, he said, I would like for you and some of my people from my office here that are well versed in this to go up to Washington and talk to the Treasury and tell them what we're doing. And I said, Bruce, I'd be glad to. We went up there and we explained the whole thing to them and came away with their decision that, yes, you're completely different from Louisiana. You didn't borrow money to establish your permanent fund. You've got it. And so we're going to allow this. And we sold one issue that summer of severance tax income fund bonds. The next year, in January then the price of oil had dropped drastically. It got down to $6 a barrel again. And Tony and I was scared to death that he was not going to have enough bonding money to do some of the things he really wanted to do. And I remember Bill Warren called me and said, John, the governor really wants to repeal your legislation on this on these bonds. And I said, well, you're in the legislature, you can vote against it, but I'm not. So just fight it as far as I'm concerned. Well, he said, I will. But it passed. They repealed the whole thing. The thing that was going to do away, was going to produce enough money to do away with our income tax and other taxes that is such a burden on a lot of our citizens. then that's about the sum story of the whole thing. Yeah, you know, Claire, like I say, very few people, even legislators, understand the history of these things and why we do it. The important thing you want to keep in mind, once you deplete a barrel of oil or any depletion of any mineral, it's gone. You can't tax it again. And yet, as long as it's in the ground, that's for the benefit of the future. And that's why we set some of these things aside. We need to. And look what it did last year, like I told you, $540 million directly to the public schools. That's important. Now that we hear a lot of talk right now about we need to take 2% out of the Land Grant Permanent Fund and give it to early childhood education. Now that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. Where is the early childhood land? It's public school land. So if we're going to take 2% off of them, you're taking it off of the public schools. And if you put it in the Constitution at 2% every time, that's earmarking. And anything that's earmarked is either too much or too little. We just got to understand this. I'll never forget when I concluded that talk just a few years ago to the Investment Council, there was a representative from Santa Fe stood up and said, look, I don't know what we're talking about. All this money in the Land Grant Permanent Fund belongs to the people. And if they want to spend it, why not let them spend it? That's what we're up against.
I'm a moving man with the necessary urge. Daylight's free, so's the freedom surge. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. I'll take you with me if your engine runs, but don't bother me, baby. If you can't come, move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. Plane or bus, train or car, wherever it is, it's not too far. Move over, grab a hold and come along, baby. Move over, grab a hold and come along. Come on, baby, take my hand. Those who are scared out of the also ran. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. With Bobby and Joni singing so bright, who needs a compass with all of that light? Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. There's a whole new world to build out there. Let's go see it and find out where. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. White man, black man, yellow man, red, all gonna do what Lincoln said. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold and come along. I'm a moving man with the necessary urge. Daylight's free, so's the freedom surge. Move over, grab a hold and come along, babe. Move over, grab a hold